Burning the midnight oil on this, the third climb down in a month. The government released a panicked rewrite to its welfare reform bill at midnight last night, wheeling out a pre-recorded clip from the newfound rebel-in-chief, now giving the nod to what she called a good and workable compromise.
Well, I think this is a good deal. It's a big change since last week. Massive changes to ensure that the most vulnerable people are protected in terms of their personal independence payments and the health element of universal credit, and crucially involving disabled people themselves in the design of future benefit changes.
All colleagues want to get this right, and so do I.
Treasury Chair Meg Hillier isn't what the whips might call a usual suspect, but her amendment to block the bill and its projected £5 billion worth of savings got the support of 126 MPs, enough to spell defeat at the vote next Tuesday. In the midnight letter sent around Westminster WhatsApp groups, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions said all of those currently receiving personal independence payments, which help disabled people with extra living costs, would remain, quote, within the system, with tighter eligibility requirements for new claimants only, starting from 2026. All existing claimants and future claimants meeting the severe conditions criteria, it said, will have their incomes protected, meaning the government won't cut the sickness payments they previously argued incentivised people to claim long-term sickness benefits over unemployment benefits.
What I think is important about the changes we've introduced is they will make sure existing people aren't affected. I know there has been real anxiety and concern, even though 9 out of 10 people currently on PIP wouldn't be affected. There has been great anxiety. We've listened to that. We're protecting existing claimants, but we're making changes for the future so those who can work get support and those who can't are protected.
The government said it would consult with disability groups over stricter eligibility for new PIP claimants in 2026. Claimants that charities say are now at a disadvantage.
And there's a risk that this is going to create two different tiers of welfare support for disabled people experiencing the same condition and experiencing the same level of costs as each other, but being provided with totally different support.
Today's reversal has left the Chancellor with what the government says is a £1.5 billion shortfall, although economists at the Resolution Foundation say the true figure is double that.
So what this means is the government will really have to think hard before the autumn statement around how the Chancellor meets her fiscal rules. She's obviously got a suite of options available to her, tax and spending, but it is clear that with these changes there will be billions of pounds to make up.
Look, I have taken tough decisions.
Tough choices now.
Tough choices won't just stop there.
Tough choices have become a well-worn adage of this government, soon to celebrate its anniversary. But with so many U-turns in so little time, 3 in the last month alone, some say it seems more like a government on the run.
I'm joined by John McTernan, formerly Tony Blair's political secretary. John, thank you for joining us. Firstly, a 12:27 a.m. announcement appeasing furious backbenchers, the third U-turn now in a month. Are these the actions of a government in control?
It's definitely the action of the government that are listening to its backbenchers. And in the end, if you can't deliver your own backbenchers to change things, you can't really control the Commons. And I think it is a government who have decided. Well, they heard the message finally, haven't they? That this was unacceptable from the minute it was first floated to take £5 billion out of disability benefits. £5 billion, that's £1,000 a year from 5 million people. It was always going to hurt people, and Labour backbenchers were probably never going to vote for it because it's not really very Labour.
You said that he's been listening to backbenchers. I mean, until Wednesday, he was describing this as noises off. He's not really listening to them, is he? He's forced into this position.
What you do is much more important than what you say. There was no doubt earlier this week that the government were preparing for a compromise. They called it a conversation at one point. You never admit you're going to change until you change. Always in politics, you should change fast. Change as soon as you know you're going to have to change direction. And it's been known since the May elections, I think, that this was not going to be able to be passed in Parliament. And so what's needed, we're nearly a year into this government. What's needed is a more strategic approach to all the questions about domestic politics. Winter fuel payments too expensive. Now they've been restored. Now they're going to be restored. Disability cuts, they were going to happen. Now they're going to be watered down. Two-child limit, too expensive to lift, but probably going to be lifted. There needs to be a domestic policy theory, something that says we're doing all these things for a reason. And the bad handling of these things is one thing, but it was always a bad decision. There was never a way to handle it properly.
You mentioned a couple of those U-turns there, including winter fuel payments and perhaps the two-child benefit cap there. Do you think this spells tax rises?
Look, I think there will need to be tax rises. They don't need to be tax rises that break the fiscal rules the government stood on in the election. They don't need to be tax rises that hit families or businesses. You could target gambling, online gambling, in the way that Gordon Brown suggested. So tax something that's actually not a public good, tax that and extra. Or you could tax the banks. I've always said banks have no friends. So find things that are unpopular or bad and tax them. And that's a way to kind of bring some balance into the budget.
Keir Starmer talks a big talk about making tough choices, but then we've seen him reverse on several of those. Is he a pushover?
Look, I think the language of tough choices, hard choices, you understand the rhetorical force of them is an attempt to say, this isn't easy. I would prefer it if the government were clear about blaming the people who made this so hard. You know, the reason we're in a difficult situation in terms of the markets and borrowing to invest is that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the Tory party, Tory government, crashed the economy. If you don't make a villain of your opponents, you end up being made a villain by your own actions. So just claiming and complaining that things are difficult isn't enough. And then to say, look, I'm being hard in this difficult situation. You need to be Labour in every situation if you're going to be a Labour government.
And you think that some of his decisions have been fundamentally un-Labour?
I think trying to take £4,000, nearly £4,000 away from 1 million people with disabilities isn't in line with Labour's values, no, and that's why it's going to have to be withdrawn.
And more than 120 of his MPs didn't want these changes. I mean, they're not going to want them in 2026 either, are they?
No one, I think, thinks there's a majority in the party, probably not even in the ministerial teams, for the changes in the form that they had. What we've done now is taken the big threat of money being removed from existing recipients of PIP and no one believes that this money should be taken from existing claimants, and no one believes this money should be taken away from people who are currently receiving it. That's a big concession by the government. The next part of this is actually to work out what the kinds of reforms are going to be. And the commitment from the government is to co-design this with disabled people, to co-design this with organisations representing people with disabilities.
But I mean, so even sorry, just to step in there, even if they do that, we're still going to have a two-tier system where people who are signing up now will have a much better package than people with exactly the same needs who apply after 2026.
Whenever you change benefits, you have legacy claimants and new claimants. That always happens in any change. There's still people receiving different forms of benefit from the past.
We're coming up to Starmer's first year in office, and he's been giving a series of reflective interviews. In one of them, telling a journalist that he regretted his use of language. In his much-trailed flagship immigration speech, he referred in that to an island of strangers, which he's now admitted, could be interpreted, was reminiscent of that infamous Enoch Powell speech. I mean, what do you make of that and what it says about his political judgment?
Look, I think what you saw in that interview is a very honest reflection by Keir Starmer. It's kind of, you get the whole person. He's not a politician like other politicians. Look at the fact when President Trump dropped his papers, Keir just stepped down and picked them up and gave them to him. He thinks little of gestures or words or language that other people would be very unhappy about. His apology was straightforward. He didn't blame the staff. Many politicians blame the staff. He blamed himself. He didn't even excuse himself because of the circumstances in which he made the speech, just after he found out that his former home had been firebombed. So he actually has got an openness to him, which I think is a real strength, and the willingness to change, the willingness to apologise.
But do you think he made that speech to chase the reform vote, and do you think that was a misjudgment?
Look, I think the entire strategy of chasing the reform vote solely is an error. The country's a 50-50 country. The further you move towards the harshness of reform, the anti-immigration rhetoric, the language, the nastiness really inherent in that, you alienate potential voters on the centre-left. And so 2024 was a great victory for Labour. Those circumstances will never happen again. There will never be a government that the country want to turf out like the Tory government was. We have to then make, the Labour Party have to make, the Labour government have to make a positive case for, we started so many good things, keep us in power. And I don't think ever saying, don't vote for those guys, they're baddies, is going to work. We're going to be the government with our record, and that record will be great internationally. It could be really strong domestically if we do the investment properly, do the housing, and we don't make missteps like on the disability benefits. Then in 4 years' time, then the country will be going, no, that's actually a lot done, but a lot left to do. Let's come for a second term of Labour.
John McTernan, thank you very much for talking to us.